Hi, I'm Will Arnold, Head of Climate Action Institution of Structural Engineers, and this is a brief update on some of the cross-industry action we've seen in the embodied carbon space over the last year or so. I've got three things to touch on. So the first is around embodied carbon regulation. I've titled this page under Part Z, but actually it's a bit broader than that these days. So if you haven't followed Part Z, this is a sort of industry-backed proposed amendment to the building regs. So myself and a series of other engineers and architects got together about a year and a half ago now and said, why don't we just write what the oven ready, because this was back in Boris Johnson days and that was a phrase that we used a lot. What would the oven ready amendment to the building regs look like if you were to try and regulate whole life carbon? So we produced a part that would go into Schedule 1 of the building regs, and we called it Part Z because we didn't know what letter would be used next by DLUX, so we just went to the end of the alphabet. And we produced this what would become an approved document, Z, to sit alongside it if it were approved. Of course, it's not been approved yet, so it's currently an industry proposed document. And we're now at the point on the day of speaking and recording this, we've got just over 200 firms having written to us in support of this regulation, including the names on the screen, and many, many more, and loads of SMEs as well, and people from all over different parts of the industry, all sorts of different sizes, from developers and investors right down to sort of supply chain and membership bodies and stuff like that. So huge backing for this. And over the course of 2022, I think the really significant thing on Part Z is that we gained, we managed to start conversations going within government finally. So at the start of the year, we had a parliamentary launch event for Part Z. We had a couple of MPs and Lords turn up to that. Since then, we had two MPs try and put through private members' bills on this topic. The second, Jerome Mayhew, managed to actually get his to the point of being debated in the House in late November of last year. It wasn't accepted by the government. They had reasons to do with not wanting to adversely affect SMEs. And they, well, it sounds like the Department of Levelling Up are not yet convinced that this should belong in regulations rather than planning. Very happy to answer questions as to why both of those worries are wrong, if you give them to me afterwards. So the government said that they wouldn't back this, but what was interesting was that firstly, the shadow minister from Labour, who was present that day, did say that Labour were interested in this as an idea. That's now formally on record. And secondly, actually, the other MPs who spoke about this topic kind of all got behind this and had positive things to say. They were more debating nuances rather than the principle of the idea. So I think that this is going to continue to gain traction. I also note that as of yesterday, the Levelling Up bill was debated in the House of Lords, and embodied carbon was mentioned 5 times in that, and Part Z was mentioned, I think, 3 or 4 times in amongst that. So it's, it's gaining traction in that house too. So I think this is only going to go in one direction. And as with many of these sorts of things, it's a case of when rather than if. But so we had a really positive year on this last year, and I think that this year should be equally interesting. Of course, we're not waiting for government to regulate this topic. A bunch of us are getting on and just writing the sort of standards for what such regulation might sort of manifest itself in anyway. And so this is the second thing I want to talk about, is the net zero carbon building standard. This is a collaboration between the 9 membership bodies on the bottom of this page: BBP, BRE, Carbon Trust, CIBC, IStructE, LETI, REBA, RICS, and UK GVC. And this is not being led by any one particular group. This is very, very much a collaboration. We have presence within the writing of this standard, both at a sort of technical level and at a governance level. And that's really important, because when this standard launches, we want it to survive for a long time. It will need updates, it will need maintenance, it will need real ownership. And so that governance level input from those bodies is really important. And over the course of last year, we took this from an idea and something that was being called for off the back of research that UK GVC had run. We created what started out as a working group and became this technical steering group and governance board. And then in the latter half a year, we managed to recruit nearly 200 volunteers from across industry to actually help write this thing. So I currently lead the embodied carbon task group of the standard. We have about 20 volunteers working from all different sectors. And we've now just finished collecting embodied carbon data from across industry so that we can start setting the sort of embodied carbon limits that will sit within this standard. So we got nearly 700 data points in over the course of the last year across all different sectors. We've got 18 different sectors, and our job now is to try and refine that into a series of benchmarks to understand where each sector is at today. And alongside that, we're doing some parallel work looking at decarbonisation of materials, opportunities in different sectors for efficiency gains, switching materials, things like that. And we're going to feed all of that back in to a sort of bigger picture, top-down bit of work that's being done within a different task group that's looking at the UK's carbon budget, how much of that goes into built environment, and therefore how much of that you end up with within different sectors, and what sort of limits does that give you year on year. And so when this is published, and we're hoping to publish the draft that can be used sometime in the middle of 2023, that would be a standard that a client can ask for on their projects. They can say, I want this building to be designed or retrofitted in accordance with the net zero carbon building standard. So I want it to be net zero in accordance with that. And you can take it away and you can work to that. You'd meet certain limits. You'd justify that in a certain way. You'd upload your data to BECD at the end of it to prove it. And you could have this badge. So that's really exciting, because that enables us to set those science-based target limits for construction in the interim, whilst we wait for regulation to sort of catch up. So I think this is going to be really important when it comes out later in the year. So please do keep your eyes out for it. And then the last thing I'll say, and I won't say very much on this, I would instead suggest that you go and watch Fabrizio's recording on the BECD. But just to say that, IStructE and others fully behind the work that's being led here within the BECD. We're supportive of this to the point where, when we launched our call for evidence on the net zero carbon building standard, we said we'd like to be able to use BECD, the beta version, the sort of test version of it, as the method of entry. So out of the 700 projects, I think about 200 or so of them came in through the BECD, which is really great, because what it means is that's 200 people's worth of data where somebody had to sit down and use the BECD, really use it and try and break it and use it in anger. And so the feedback that's now gone back into the BECD about what needs to be changed, simplified, made consistent, so on and so forth, it should be pretty watertight. And for me, I'm really proud that we were able to get these two bits of work to sort of work collaboratively in that effect. And I think that that's kind of what these sorts of forums should be all about. That's it from me. Feel free to fire me any questions if you have them.